Good morning, biology. The purpose of this video is to give students who either missed part of the notes for section 15-3 an opportunity to get them finished up, or depending on how far we actually get with the notes in class, you may have to finish up a little bit at the end. Okay, section 15-3 talks about kind of what was going on with Darwin in the decades after he returned home from his voyage, and brings it all the way up to the time where he actually went public with his findings. We're going to abbreviate Charles Darwin as capital CD, so whenever you see CD, we're talking about Darwin. All right, so he filled lots of notebooks with ideas about species diversity and his process of evolution. Really, the decades after he returned, he was accumulating. No, he'd already accumulated it. He was tying together all of this information he had, all of his influences from the other scientists that he knew about, and just trying to pull it all together and make it presentable. Also remember, please do start your numbering at number 30 and do these in Cornell Notes style. I will be going faster in the video than I do in class because you can pause the video. He was very, very bothered and disturbed by his data. At the time, the church suggested that the earth was 1,800 plus years old, that God had created everything, and his findings were contrary to that. Additionally, his wife was very religious, and he didn't want to upset her. He loved his wife very much. And lastly, his name, his reputation, the Darwin family. His father was a famous doctor. You saw in the movie he went to these dinner parties and associated with the wealthy. He didn't want to risk his family's name. Okay, so the first thing that really kind of urged him to go public with his findings is he got an essay from another naturalist that was doing research in a different part of the world that really had a lot of respect for Darwin. And he sent him his essay to have Darwin give him his opinion about it. And pretty much the essay was saying what Darwin's work had done. So Darwin was very worried that this Wallace character would get credit for basically his life's work. All right, you guys, I'm moving ahead. Did Wallace go public? Yeah, later that year, he and Darwin both did go public. Some of Darwin's work was put forth. And whenever Wallace was asked about evolution and the ideas, he always gave credit to Darwin. He had a lot of respect for him. Darwin in 1859 published his famous book on the origin of species. And one of the reasons why this book was read by so many, Darwin had the ability to really take something complex and a grand idea and put it into the book in a way that anybody who could read could understand it. And remember, at the time, most people were religious. Most people believed in God. Most people believed that the earth was only a couple thousand years old. And if you're going to influence those people and change their opinion, you're going to have to be able to explain your information in a manner that they can understand. And he was able to do that. All right, you guys, moving ahead. What did the book say? Showed that the mechanism, the tool, the process that led to evolution was natural selection. We're going to abbreviate that. Been taking place for millions of years, not just a couple thousand. Currently, still evolution happening. I was suggesting that as well. Members of each species vary from one another in important ways. At the time, variation within species was seen as mistakes, unimportant defects. Darwin argued that variation mattered, and of course it did matter, because if you have variation within a species and a characteristic gives one organism an advantage and the lack of having that characteristic gives this other organism a disadvantage in a world where there's competition, then variation is very important. It leads to the one with the good characteristic surviving, reproducing, passing that characteristic on to its offspring, and the one without the good characteristic dying, not reproducing, and eventually, over hundreds or thousands of generations, this bad characteristic, or maybe just the lack of the good one, will disappear from the population. And now the majority of the population has this good characteristic, and that is a change in species over time. And that is evolution. All right, moving ahead. All right, so Charles Darwin and artificial selection. Darwin also hung out at the pubs, and he was very interested in speaking to animal breeders. Remember chapter 13, we talked about selective breeding, animal breeders choosing certain characteristics to be involved in reproduction, guaranteeing or mostly guaranteeing that those characteristics are going to end up in the offspring. So Darwin knew that people were breeding hogs, pigs and horses and cows and birds and pigeons and dogs. He wondered that if people could choose successful or desirable characteristics, if nature could do the same thing, that if nature puts pressure on organisms through competition, whether or not those desirable characteristics can end up becoming more common from reproduction. So another key thing about Darwin is he was able to make observations, learn information from different places, and apply it to what he was trying to say. Whereas many people might ignore those things. He found all of this important, and he used it to support his ideas. All right, moving ahead. Okay, why do you think Darwin struggled with his findings? Take a look back at number 31. I didn't necessarily have you write these things down, but I suggested why he was struggling. Yeah, religion at the time ruled. His wife was religious. He didn't want to upset her. And the Darwin name he had a good reputation. His family had a good reputation. He didn't want to risk that. How long did he believe evolution had been taking place? You might want to take a look at number 38. Pardon me, that's not a 38. That's a 35. My bad. Yeah, he thought it had been happening millions of years and was still occurring at the time. Okay, struggle for existence. So humans, it's a little different because we're intelligent and we manipulate our environment, but plants and animals cannot manipulate their environment. So struggle for existence through competition. There's competition for food, places to live, habitat, opportunities to mate and reproduce. The stronger traits are going to give you access to more food. They're going to give you access to more places to live, or a place to live in general. And they're going to give you more opportunities to mate. And of course, if you're mating, that means that there's a larger chance that your offspring or the offspring in that population will start to gain those good characteristics as well. All right, so how's natural selection involved in that? Remember, you can abbreviate natural selection as capital N, capital S. So fitness, when we think of fitness, typically with humans, we think of like going to the gym or just being in shape or just being healthy. Yeah, it could definitely give you a better chance to survive longer. I don't know if it's going to give you a better chance to reproduce, but in the natural world, in plants and animals, fitness is defined as the ability to survive longer, reproduce more in a given environment. So species with good adaptations have higher fitness. Darwin proposed that fitness is a result of adaptations. And an adaptation is any inherited characteristic that increases your chance of survival. So fitness and adaptations or good characteristics go hand in hand. The more good characteristics you have, the higher your fitness. The fewer good characteristics you have, the lower your fitness. All right, moving ahead. How do these adaptations help an organism? They're better adapted to their environment. They survive more, they survive longer, and they reproduce more, and they pass on those good traits to their offspring more often. All right, organisms without good adaptations, they'll either die or leave fewer offspring. And he called that process survival of the fittest. And if you're not the fittest, then you die. And natural selection, nature chooses organisms with, sorry about that, kids. I thought I had this all good to go. Let's see if that's better. That's better. Okay. Nature chooses organisms with good adaptations to survive and those without to die. And over thousands of generations, the population will have only organisms with a good adaptation, meaning the new population, all with these good adaptations, has changed from a population with a few with those good adaptations and many without. And that is a change in the characteristics of a species over time. That is evolution. All right, you guys, moving ahead. All right, please use this as an opportunity to go back and practice a little bit with your notes. You'll have to study less when you're getting ready for the test. Darwin realized that high birth rates would force organisms to blank for blank. You might want to take a look back at number 37. A couple different ways you can answer this. Yeah, so high birth rates would force organisms to compete for food, compete for space, compete for mating opportunities. Fitness is an organism's ability to blank and blank in its given environment. You might want to take a look back at number 38. Yeah, survive and reproduce. Darwin thought that successful adaptations would allow organisms a blanker chance to survive and reproduce, and then, of course, to pass on that adaptation. Is that blank better or worse? Or stronger or lesser, weaker, stronger? A better chance. You got it. All right, you guys. All right, so Darwin's evolution evidence. Used the fossil record, of course. Geographical distribution of living species, meaning where do we find certain living species currently. Homologous, that's a word that you're familiar with. Homologous means same. Remember we talked about homologous chromosomes. So same or similar structures. Remember in the Bill Nye video, we technically do have a tailbone called the coccyx, and that is a similar structure to the tails in other primates, or tailbones in other primates. And then similarities in early development, and that is referred to as embryology. All right, moving ahead. Okay, the fossil record. Comparing fossils from older rock layers with fossils from younger layers. Scientists could document that life on Earth has changed over time. So if you can see in a series of fossils, similarities obviously all the way across, but small changes in the morphology or the actual structure of the organism over time, that is evidence that these organisms currently are related to the ones in the past and that these organisms have changed throughout time. Let's talk about the finches, the famous Galapagos finches. You'll hear this often, descent with modification. Okay, descent means came from. So if you have descended, we humans, you and your individual families have descended from your parents, who descended from their parents, your grandparents, who descended from their parents, your great-grandparents, with modification, meaning that you've come from these ancient organisms, but you've slowly changed, or your form has changed. It's been modified over time. So again, we're not sure exactly how the pair, actually it was probably more than just two, of finches got to the Galapagos from the South American mainland, but clearly they did. And his theory was that species now living on these different continents all around the world have descended from different ancestors. Okay, and that's where we kind of get into the geographical distribution a little bit. All right, moving ahead. Homologous or similar structures on different organisms in different places. So there are certain environments that favor certain adaptations. Perfect example is the oceans, or just in water in general. Sea turtles, which are reptiles, sharks, which are fish, dolphins, which are mammals, penguins, which are birds, 4 different types of organisms that have similar adaptations, because those adaptations give them an advantage in their given environment. And that would be the ability to hold your breath for long periods of time, streamline bodies to make sure that you can get through the water with very, very little friction, a quickness to be able to survive predators. You might be thinking, what predators do sharks need to, get away from? Humans. Killer whales. There are, obviously there's some sharks that are not worried about killer whales, but the smaller ones are. All right, importance of homologous structures. So the similarities and differences help biologists put them into different groups, and also figure out, based on the number of characteristics in common, how recently they branched off. Because remember Darwin's idea with the tree of life, if you're on the same branch, you are closely related. Whereas if you've got, I know it's difficult to do this without a picture, but if you've got, the top of a branch over here as compared to the very bottom base of the tree, these organisms are not as closely related. Basically, the further you are away from the trunk and from the base of the tree, the longer it's been since you diverged from that ancestral species. But if you can group organisms with all these similar characteristics, you know that they had a much more recent common ancestor. And really, I mean, just taking it all the way back, the idea with evolution is that every living thing on this planet now, and every living thing that has ever been on this planet, evolved from some sort of a bacteria that first sprung to life about 3.5 billion years ago in that primordial soup in the oceans. And since then, organisms have been branching off and branching off. And of course, if you branched off a really, really long time ago, you've had a lot of time to get more different from that organism. If you've branched off only more recently, then you have fewer differences with that ancestor. Okay. And I know that it's difficult for you to picture what I'm talking about when I'm only using my hands, but there will be an opportunity. We're going to do we're going to compare the number of amino acids and the similarities of amino acids between some different organisms. And of course, the more common amino acids are, that would suggest that the more recent we have diverged from that other species, or we are more related than others. Anyway, that'll kind of give you guys a visual a little bit later. All right, moving ahead. So how do embryos help explain evolution? So the early stages or embryos of many animals with backbones, we're talking about vertebrates, are very similar. If you look at the embryos of birds and fish and mammals and reptiles, the embryos all look very, very similar. There's a great picture in the book, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 385. Show you an embryo of a chicken, embryo of a turtle, embryo of a rat. Yeah, there's also a really good picture on page 384 about homologous structures, leg bones, and different types of organisms. And also a good diagram of geographical distribution, page 383, and of fossil evidence on page 382. And of course, you know that if you're doing your reading notes, but many of you that do the class notes don't do the reading notes. Can't make you do anything, but it'll help you learn. I guarantee that. Whoa, my bad. Moving ahead. Okay, what were two of the four pieces of evidence Darwin presented to support his ideas? Take a look back at number 42, if you can't remember. Yeah, so we got fossil record, we got embryology, we got homologous structures, and we have geographical distribution of species. All right, if scientists had fossils from younger and older rock layers, they could suggest that life had blank, blank, blank. What are those three words that I commonly use to describe evolution? Yeah, changed over time. If different organisms live in similar environments, the natural selection pressures will also be similar. Yeah, so if you can't hold your breath for long periods of time, you're going to die if you're living in the ocean. If you can't swim without a whole lot of friction, you're going to die in the oceans. So the types of environments pressure these organisms to either not survive or they allow them to survive based on how successful those characteristics allow the organism to be. The last one. That's the last one. Okay. The scientist who motivated Darwin to publish On the Origin of Species. So what really made Darwin's heart stop when he was reading that essay saying, wow, this sounds very similar to my work? Yeah, it was Mr. Wallace. Differences among individuals of a single species. What do we call those differences? Remember, Darwin thought these differences were important. At the time, most people thought they were unimportant. They were defects. Of course, that's genetic variation. changes that increase species fitness in its environment over time are due to principle of common descent, geographical distribution of that species, natural selection, or habitat selection. Yeah, it's natural selection. An inherited characteristic that increases an organism's chance of survival. What do we call that? Yeah, that's an adaptation. Evidence used by Darwin to support the idea of evolution included all of the following except which one stands out and is not true? Which thing did he not know about yet? Because really that took the work of Gregor Mendel, Rosalind Franklin, James Watson, and Francis Crick to understand the genetic mechanism through how inheritance takes place. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for the notes. These notes are going to be due Wednesday at 9 p.m. We'll see you in the Zoom.